Hello and welcome back to another day in our Bible study in Isaiah. We are in Isaiah 3. Hopefully you've read the chapter. Go to the website where you'll be able to download the PDF notes, and let's get into it. Now, we've already talked about our timeline for Isaiah and his ministry spanning from about 740 to 680 BC. Obviously, being in the third chapter, we are towards the beginning of that. You'll notice that chapter 2 rolls right into chapter 3. So our characters, our key figures here are going to remain the same. We have Isaiah, who is the son of Amoz. We were introduced to him in chapter 1, and he is the prophet who God is speaking through. He's speaking to the people of Judah, specifically to the citizens of Jerusalem. They're kind of the main target of a lot of his words, and he is correcting them for living wicked lives and telling them what God is going to do about it if they don't straighten up. And then we have two definitions today. The first one is diviner. This is in verse 2. I don't know if it's translated the same in every version. A diviner is somebody who claims to have the ability to tell the future, supernatural, and they often use things like omens or talismans or bones or some other tool to help them with their work. You've probably seen something like that in the movie somewhere. And then the term Sodom. This was mentioned in the last chapter, probably should have defined it there, but most of you are going to know what this is a reference to if you're familiar with the Old Testament, but if you're not, way back in the book of Genesis, there was this city called Sodom, and they were known for being exceptionally wicked. They're often talked about with the city of Gomorrah. This was one of the most sin-filled cities ever mentioned in the Bible. It was so wicked, in fact, that God supernaturally destroyed it by causing sulfur and fire to rain down on it during the days of Abraham. And in Jewish culture, the term Sodom and Gomorrah, it became a byword basically for excessive, extraordinary wickedness. Now for our outline today, we've got 26 verses, and I'm going to basically keep them all in one section. As I mentioned, this is a continuation of what we talked about in chapter 2. The title for today, Judgment Coming for the Evil Men and Women in Judah. You remember from chapter 2, we talked about the coming of the day of the Lord's judgment. So he's continuing with that theme. He says, on that day, he's going to punish the people of Judah, take away all of their resources, their necessities, and also strip them of all their good leaders. And in their place, God was going to give them boys for princes and infants as rulers. And I think what he's saying here is that their rulers or the men who become their rulers are going to have the intellect of boys and the governing capabilities of infants. Their society was going to devolve into violence and into abuse. It would be a community where the elderly weren't respected or men who deserved honor didn't get any. They would be in such a desperate need for leaders that men with really meager qualifications would be offered leadership roles. In the text, it talks about how a man, they say, well, he's a leadership material because he has a cloak. And a lot of them didn't have a cloak because God had taken everything away from this. Oh, he's got a cloak. How about we appoint him to be our leader? Talks about that in verse 6. But even the will to lead will have disappeared from Judah during the days of God's judgment. Those appointed or offered these positions would just flat turn them down because really there was no point in leading or reigning over the ruins and rubble of the once great Judah. What was sad was that the people weren't ashamed of their sins. In fact, they were proud of them, and God says they proclaimed them like Sodom. No shame at all. Now, the men of Judah, the leaders, were largely to blame for this. They abused the people. They plundered the poor. But God also put some guilt on the women of Judah and Jerusalem. They had contributed to this corruption in the nation. It says that they walked around showing themselves off, encouraging lust, and flaunting their wealth. God was preparing to stand opposed to them, and he says that he's going to take away their fine things and their comfortable lives and exchange them for the chains of slaves. God would cause Jerusalem's men to be killed in battle as judgment for their sins, and their women to sit destitute in mourning in the dirt of the city. Now, there is one little good part of this chapter in verse 10, talks about how there actually were still some righteous people who honored God in Judah, and God made them a promise that he would spare them from the harshness of the judgments that were going to be received by all the bad people. So that is our summary for chapter 3 today. Let's talk about an application now. A nation that's led by weak men is a potential sign of God's displeasure and his judgment. A nation is strong when it's led by men of values, men of conviction, men who honor a power higher than themselves. Nations are destined for failure, though, when they are led by convictionless, weak men and godless men who have no real principles other than to just appease the mob and protect their own job. I imagine the people of Judah would have called themselves a progressive society. They had embraced other cultures. They had embraced the gods of these other cultures and the beliefs of other cultures. They had welcomed all of these people in. They had empowered their women to sexualize themselves and for that to be a big part of their society. And they were open-minded to accepting the truth of other religions, using these diviners and these soothsayers, fortune tellers. And their leaders promoted this stuff and let it all happen and didn't stand really for anything. Everything was fine. This was not a country that was progressing. God says this is a country that's degressing. They're devolving into stupidity, immorality, and moving away from God. I think there's some parallels there between this culture and maybe our modern culture, and some things we can definitely learn there.